Javi Reyes gripped the controls of his cargo ship as it hurtled through the vast emptiness of space. A routine delivery mission had gone horribly wrong. The flashing red lights on his dashboard screamed out warnings, and the growl of the ship's hull under stress was almost drowned out by the distant explosions rocking the ship. Pirate ships surrounded him, their weapons tearing through the fragile ship's hull. He had been caught in a trap. The pirates had waited until he was far away from any nearby spaceports and then ambushed him with overwhelming firepower. Javi tried to outrun them, but his ship was too slow and damaged to evade their grasp. He knew it was only a matter of time before they boarded him, but he couldn't just let them take the cargo. His fingers moved frantically over the controls, trying to stabilize the ship. A final explosion rattled through the cabin, and a sharp jolt sent him crashing into the side of the cockpit. The last thing he heard before everything went black was the deafening sound of tearing metal. When Javi regained consciousness, he felt the cold, damp touch of dirt beneath him. He opened his eyes slowly, disoriented, unsure of where he was. The world around him was foreign, unlike any planet he had ever seen. The air was thick with moisture, and the sky overhead was a murky purple with streaks of lightning flashing sporadically in the distance. The ground beneath him was rocky and uneven, and the ship was a twisted wreck, lying in a heap of debris a few meters away. Groaning, Javi managed to push himself up onto his knees, his head still pounding from the crash. His hands instinctively checked his survival gear, and though battered, he was alive, something many of his crewmates wouldn't have been able to say. The ship was beyond repair, and the pirates were long gone. His first priority was survival. Javi stumbled to his feet, trying to get a sense of his surroundings. In the distance, he saw a strange structure, something resembling an ancient temple, but that was far from his immediate concern. First, he needed shelter. The weather was turning worse, and the thick clouds overhead promised a storm. The planet, wherever it was hostile. With no other option, Javi started walking in the direction of the mysterious structure, hoping it would offer some form of refuge. The landscape around him was eerily quiet, with no sounds of wildlife or other signs of life. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him, though. As he approached the strange structure, Javi's instincts kicked in. His military training told him to be cautious, to watch every step. He moved closer to the entrance, which was framed by towering stone pillars covered in moss. The door to the structure was open, but the inside was pitch black. He hesitated for a moment before stepping inside, the sound of his boots echoing in the hollow space. The air was thick with the scent of damp stone and age, but there was something else. A faint hum. Javi's eyes adjusted to the darkness, and he began to see faint glowing symbols etched into the walls. As his hand brushed over one of the carvings, a sudden light flashed, momentarily blinding him. The entire room seemed to come alive, and he instinctively reached for the weapon holstered at his side, though he knew it wouldn't do him much good. Suddenly, he heard a noise behind him. Whipping around, Javi was met by the glowing eyes of a strange alien creature. It was humanoid in shape, but its features were unervingly different. The being was taller than Javi, with smooth, pale skin, and a glowing red hue emanated from its chest. It stared at him for a long moment before tilting its head, as if studying him. Without warning, a group of other beings emerged from the shadows, their forms equally alien. They moved with a grace that was unnatural, and Javi's heart raced. These beings were not like anything he had ever encountered before, but despite their otherworldly appearance, they seemed more curious than hostile. A voice, soft yet commanding, spoke in an unfamiliar language, but Javi understood the underlying meaning: human. Before Javi could react, the creatures closed in, and the darkness of the room seemed to swallow him whole. Javi woke again, but this time, he wasn't lying on the cold floor. He was sitting in a small, sterile room with strange symbols etched into the walls. The air was cool, and he could feel the faint hum of machinery in the background. His hands were bound to the chair, and he could hear voices outside the room. Alien voices, speaking rapidly in a language he couldn't understand. A tall figure entered, her skin an unusual shade of red, her eyes sharp and calculating. She was dressed in a flowing robe that shimmered with an eerie glow, and her presence radiated authority. The others, standing at attention in the background, were silent, observing the scene with intensity. The woman regarded Javi with cold, analytical eyes. "You are human," she said, her voice soft but firm. "You have something that we need. Your biology, it is unlike anything we've encountered. You are the key to saving us." Javi blinked, confusion clouding his thoughts. "Saving you? Who are you?" The alien woman paused, her gaze hardening. "We are the Zelnari. Our species. We have lost the ability to reproduce naturally. We depend on technology to survive, but that is not enough. We need what you have, your biological nature. It is the only thing that can save us from extinction." Javi stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in. The urgency in her tone was unmistakable. The gravity of the situation was clear. He wasn't just a survivor of a crash. He was now a critical piece in the survival of an entire alien species. As the woman turned to leave, she gave one last command. "You will be studied. You will help us, whether you want to or not." Javi sat in silence, his mind racing. What had he gotten himself into? And more importantly, what was he going to do next? The alien's words echoed in his mind. "You are the key." And in that moment, Javi knew that his life, his very survival, was no longer just about escaping the wreckage of his ship. It was about something much bigger, something he couldn't yet understand. But the future was already being shaped. That Javi's mind raced as he sat alone in the cold, sterile room. The heavy silence was oppressive, the faint hum of machinery the only sound breaking the stillness. The alien woman's words echoed in his mind, their weight sinking deep into his gut. "You are the key." What did that even mean? And more importantly, what kind of life was he going to be subjected to in this alien prison? His wrists burned from the restraints that held him to the chair, but he didn't try to break free. He knew it was futile. His mind was the only weapon he had left, and he needed to use it carefully. The door creaked open with a soft whoosh, and Javi's heart jumped into his throat. Two of the Zelnari entered. One was the red-skinned woman who had spoken earlier, her eyes narrowed and calculating. The other was an older male Zelnari, his skin a muted gray with a faint blue glow. He didn't look like he had much interest in Javi, but the way he observed him was unnerving. "You have had time to think," the woman said, her voice calm but laced with authority. "And you should know that we mean you no harm. Yet, but you must cooperate. Your biology is crucial to the survival of our species." Javi tilted his head, studying her with a mix of defiance and curiosity. "You want me to just hand over my biology? What makes you think I'll help you?" The red-skinned woman's lips curled into a smile, though there was no warmth in it. "Because you have no choice. You're not just a prisoner, human. You're an opportunity, a chance for us to survive." Her eyes gleamed with an intensity that sent a chill through Javi. "And if you cooperate, you will be treated with respect. You might even find a way back to your kind. But if you resist, the consequences will be dire." Javi swallowed hard. The implications of her words hung in the air like a weight he couldn't escape. The Zelnari were desperate. He could see that much. But what would they do to him if he refused? He had no answers, only questions that twisted in his mind. The gray-skinned Zelnari, who had been silent up until now, finally spoke. His voice was deep and almost monotone. "We are not your enemies, human. The Zelnari are a proud people, but we are on the brink of extinction. The loss of our ability to reproduce naturally is a grave issue. And you might hold the solution." Javi's gaze flickered between them. The older male Zelnari wasn't as intimidating as the woman, but his words were no less serious. "How?" Javi asked, his voice tinged with suspicion. "How can I help you with that? I'm not some miracle worker." The red-skinned woman stepped forward, her eyes locked on Javi's. "Your biology, human. Your capacity for reproduction. It's the key. We have attempted countless methods to reverse our condition, but none have succeeded. We have failed because we are not like you. We need your DNA, your essence. It could provide us with the possibility of natural reproduction once again." Javi blinked, the horror of the situation slowly sinking in. "You're saying you want to use me?" Her expression softened, but only slightly. "We are not your enemies, Javi. If you help us, you will be regarded as a savior of sorts. You will have a place among us, a chance to leave this planet when our task is complete." A place among them? Javi couldn't even imagine it. But the notion of being treated like some sort of god, an object of worship for his reproductive ability, made his stomach churn. Yet, something inside him told him that they weren't lying. There was desperation in their voices, a sense of urgency that mirrored his own. He didn't know if he should trust them, but he certainly didn't have many options. "Why don't I just leave? You said it yourself. I could go back to my kind. What's stopping me?" The woman's smile vanished, replaced by an icy, calculating expression. "You're not going anywhere, Javi. Not until we are sure we have what we need. You are not the first human we have encountered, but you are the first to hold the answer to our survival." Javi's stomach tightened. "What do you mean? You've tried this with other humans?" The red-skinned woman's gaze flickered for a moment, and the older Zelnari shifted uncomfortably. For the first time, it seemed like they were hiding something. But they didn't respond. Javi pressed, his voice low but urgent. "What happened to them? Did you kill them?" The woman took a step back, her lips tightening into a thin line. She didn't answer immediately, and for a moment, the silence between them was thick with unspoken truths. The older Zelnari spoke in a low, gravelly tone, his voice almost a warning. "Javi, some answers are better left unspoken. You're not here to question us. You're here to help us. If you choose not to, you will leave us with no choice." Javi's mind raced. He had to get out of there. He had to find a way to escape, to figure out what these beings were really after. But he knew that running wasn't an option. Not yet. For now, he had to play along. The red-skinned woman turned to the older Zelnari. "Prepare him for the tests. He will understand soon enough." As the older Zelnari stepped forward to unbind Javi's hands, he felt the cold weight of what was happening settle on his shoulders. He didn't know if he was playing into their hands, or if there was a chance, just a small one, that he could turn the situation around. He had no choice but to cooperate for now. The tests, whatever they were, would begin soon. But Javi's mind was already working. He had to survive, had to figure out a way to outsmart them. If he didn't, he would be nothing more than a tool, an unwilling key in their desperate fight for survival. And that was something Javi Reyes could never allow. Javi was shoved roughly into a sterile, cold chamber that hummed with the sound of unseen machinery. His legs wobbled slightly from the restraints, but he kept his back straight, staring ahead as the door behind him slid shut with a hissing sound. The dim light overhead flickered for a moment, casting erratic shadows across the walls. The air smelled metallic, like something old and untamed. The woman, the red-skinned leader, stepped forward, her eyes narrowing as she regarded him closely. She was no longer the cold, calculating figure from before. Now, there was a glint of something else, something personal in her gaze. Her words were direct, clipped. "You will undergo a series of procedures," she said flatly, walking toward a set of tables lined with strange tools and instruments. "These are necessary to confirm your potential. Do not make this difficult." Javi's mind was a swirl of confusion, fear, and determination. He had no idea what they were about to do to him, but his gut told him it wasn't going to be anything simple. His mind flashed to the moment he'd first heard their claim. His biology was the key, but what did that really mean? Were they planning to use him like a lab rat? Or was there something else? The old Zelnari, who had remained in the shadows, finally spoke, his voice rasping like stone scraping on stone. "You will not be harmed if you comply," he said. "But if you resist, the consequences will be severe." Javi's fists clenched. He wasn't about to be anyone's experiment, not without a fight. But for now, he had no choice. He couldn't afford to make an enemy of them. Not yet. He needed time to figure out what they were really after. The woman gestured to the table in the center of the room, where two mechanical arms were positioned like something out of a nightmare. The instruments they held gleamed with cold precision. "Sit," she commanded. Javi took a deep breath, his heart pounding in his chest. He moved slowly toward the table, keeping his eyes on the alien woman the entire time. He could feel the weight of her gaze, her judgment. It was like she was studying him, trying to peel back every layer of his being to understand what made him different from the other humans she had encountered. Reluctantly, Javi sat on the table. His body was tense, his mind running through every possible scenario. He wasn't sure what they wanted: his blood, his genetic material. Whatever it wasn't going to come easy. Without a word, the woman nodded to one of the machines. The mechanical arms buzzed to life, and a needle, thick and gleaming, lowered toward Javi's arm. He tensed, his muscles coiling as the needle came closer. But before it could make contact, something unexpected happened. A loud bang echoed from the door, and the red-skinned woman froze, her eyes snapping to the entrance. The older Zelnari barely had time to react before the door exploded inward with a force that sent debris flying across the room. Javi's heart lurched as a group of figures stormed into the chamber, weapons raised. There were 5 of them, tall, broad-shouldered, their dark skin covered in the markings of their kind. They were the rebels, the Zelnari who had defected from the ruling regime, the ones who fought for freedom. The leader of the rebels, a sharp-eyed, scarred Zelnari, waved them forward. "Take him," she commanded. "We need him alive." In a blur of movement, Javi was yanked from the table. The restraints that had held him were torn apart, and he was shoved toward the rebels. He didn't have time to process what was happening. He only knew he needed to move, to escape. The woman's voice cut through the chaos, cold and commanding. "You cannot take him. He belongs to us." The rebel leader didn't hesitate. Not anymore. With swift precision, the rebels engaged the guards, the room erupting into violence. Javi's pulse raced as he was dragged through the chaotic fray. His mind was spinning, the adrenaline surging through his veins. This wasn't just an escape. It was a fight for his life. And in the middle of it all, the red-skinned woman was still watching him, her expression unreadable, her fingers twitching as if calculating the next move. "Who are you?" Javi shouted over the clashing sounds of the battle, his voice hoarse with fear and confusion. He had no idea who these rebels were or why they were saving him, but something in the rebel leader's eyes told him they weren't here to harm him. The rebel leader's voice was low and urgent. "We're the ones who want to change things, the ones who want to bring down the oppressors. You, Javi, you're the key to saving us." Javi's mind reeled. The key again? What did they want with him? What was he supposed to do? But before he could voice his thoughts, the red-skinned woman snapped her fingers. The lights in the room flickered, and a blinding energy pulse surged from the walls, knocking everyone off their feet. Javi crashed to the floor, his body slamming against the cold ground. He barely had time to react before a shadow loomed over him. The red-skinned woman stood above him, her face full of fury and determination. "You are mine, human," she growled. "You will do as I say. And if you think you've escaped, you're gravely mistaken." Javi struggled to get up, but the shockwave of the pulse had left him disoriented. The woman's eyes burned with anger, and in that moment, he understood something terrifying. He was no longer a pawn. He was a weapon, a symbol of their future or their destruction. The rebel leader scrambled to her feet, her eyes wide with alarm. "Retreat. We got to get out of here now." But Javi wasn't sure if he could escape anymore. The room was spinning, and the weight of the woman's words pressed against him like a storm. He had just been dragged into a war, not just for survival, but for something far more dangerous. The fight was only beginning, and Javi was the one they all wanted. Javi barely had time to catch his breath before chaos erupted around him. The room trembled as the alien woman, leader of the Zelnari, raised her hands, her eyes glowing with a deep, fiery intensity. It wasn't just rage, it was something much darker. The air around them hummed with unnatural energy as the walls began to warp, bending under the pressure of the force she was controlling. "Do not think for a second that you've won, human," she snarled, her voice slicing through the tension like a blade. "You are a tool, nothing more, and tools do not escape." Javi's heart pounded in his chest. The woman's words, her eyes, everything about her screamed authority, control. She wasn't just angry, she was desperate. and he had no idea how far she was willing to go to get him back. The rebel leader, still recovering from the shockwave, scrambled to pull Javi to his feet. "Move!" she hissed, urgency in her voice. But it was too late. The ground beneath them shook violently as the air around the red-skinned woman began to crackle with static. Her outstretched hands emitted a pulse of energy that lit up the room in blinding white light. The force of the attack sent Javi and the rebels flying backwards, crashing into the walls with sickening thuds. Javi struggled to stand, his vision blurry, his ears ringing. Through the haze of pain, he saw the rebel leader, Elira. Her name was slammed against a pillar, her body crumpled to the ground. The other rebels were either knocked out or pinned by the force of the attack, and the room was thick with the scent of burning metal and ozone. But Javi wasn't about to lie down and take it. He forced himself to his knees, gritting his teeth against the pain. "I can't die here." The thoughts surged through his mind like a surge of adrenaline, and he pushed himself up, staring at the woman who had nearly killed him moments ago. "You think this is your victory?" the red-skinned leader mocked. "You will never leave this place alive. The Qatar will make sure of that." Javi's eyes locked on her, a wave of defiance rising within him. The rebels, his only chance, were on the ground, incapacitated. He had to do something. But what? He wasn't a fighter. He was just a cargo pilot, a man who had never held a weapon in his life. But in this moment, he realized something. He wasn't just any human. His biology, his very existence, was a beacon of hope for these alien rebels. He was the key to everything. He wasn't just here by accident. Javi reached down to his belt, fingers trembling. His hand found a piece of technology, one of the devices he'd scavenged from his ship before it crashed. It was a weapon, an experimental weapon, a prototype he had no clue how to use. But now it was all he had. With a surge of determination, Javi aimed the weapon at the red-skinned woman, who was still gloating in her apparent victory. He pulled the trigger. Nothing happened. His heart sank. The red-skinned woman laughed, a cruel, mocking sound that sent a chill down Javi's spine. "You really think you can?" But before she could finish, the weapon in Javi's hand began to hum, its energy amplifying in his grasp. With a burst of light, the energy shot out, a beam of pure, focused power. The red-skinned woman froze, her eyes widening in shock as the blast hit her square in the chest. The blast wasn't just powerful, it was unpredictable. It didn't just strike her, it tore through her, shattering the very air around her. A violent explosion of energy erupted, sending a shockwave throughout the room. The woman was thrown backward, slamming into the wall with a deafening crack. Javi's mouth went dry. He hadn't meant to kill her. He just wanted to stop her. But there was no time to dwell on it. The rebels were still unconscious, and the battle wasn't over. The weapon had overloaded, its energy core unstable. A red light began to flash on the device, signaling its impending detonation. "Get down!" Javi yelled, diving toward the rebel leader who was still groaning on the floor. He pulled her out of harm's way just as the weapon exploded in his hands, sending shards of metal and energy cascading across the room. The force of the explosion was staggering, knocking Javi to the ground once more. His head spun, blood trickling from a cut on his forehead, but somehow he was still alive. When the dust cleared, the red-skinned woman was gone. The once immaculate chamber now lay in ruins, the walls scorched, and the air thick with smoke. Javi could hear the distant sound of alarms blaring. The facility was on high alert. Elira, her face pale and covered in grime, struggled to her feet. She reached out a hand to Javi, her eyes filled with a mix of gratitude and determination. "We have to go now. We don't have much time." Javi nodded, his chest heaving as he gasped for breath. "Where to?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Elira's lips curled into a grim smile. "The heart of their empire." Javi's eyes widened. The heart of their empire? He didn't have the luxury of thinking about it. The rebels had just lost their leader, but now he was the one they needed. They would follow him, whether he was ready for it or not. He was the symbol of hope, the key to their survival, and he wasn't going to let them down. Not now, not when everything had changed. The moment they emerged from the crumbling structure, the full scale of the disaster hit Javi. Smoke billowed into the sky, darkening the atmosphere. Alarms continued to blare, but it was the sound of something much worse that caught his attention. A heavy, mechanical roar, followed by a deep, rumbling vibration underfoot. "They're coming," Elira whispered, her voice tight with urgency. Javi's heart raced. He had no idea how he had gotten into this mess, but now there was no turning back. He wasn't just a simple cargo pilot anymore. He was humanity's last hope. The rebels who had managed to survive the explosion were scrambling to regroup. Some of them were armed, some weren't, but their determination was undeniable. But no one spoke. There was no time for words, only action. Javi followed Elira. The sound of their boots pounding the dirt mixed with the distant roars of enemy vehicles approaching. In the chaos of his thoughts, one thing remained clear. They had to make it to the central command hub, the heart of the Empire. If they didn't, this was the end. For him, for the rebels, for everyone who had ever been oppressed by the Qatar Empire. The moon hung overhead, a silent witness to the approaching storm. The rebellion, though small, had one advantage. The Qatar Empire had underestimated them. They had underestimated him. He had lived to see another day, and now, that life was worth something. "We'll never make it," one of the rebels muttered, voice filled with dread. "The Qatari forces are too strong." Javi turned to him, anger flaring in his chest. He had to make them believe. "We'll make it," he snapped. "We have no choice." Elira shot him a look, part caution, part approval. "It's time. You're the one they've been waiting for." The rebel leader's words hit Javi like a ton of bricks. He had always been just a pilot, a loner in space, scraping by. But now everything had changed. His very biology, his humanity, was the key. It was a symbol of life they all so desperately needed. The Qatar had hunted him, studied him, and feared him. But it was time to turn the tables. As they approached the heart of the enemy's empire, the distant sounds of battle began to fade. It was eerily quiet, too quiet. The atmosphere, thick with tension, weighed on Javi's chest. He could almost feel the presence of the enemy closing in around them. Elira stopped suddenly, signaling for everyone to stay down. "They know we're coming," she murmured, her sharp eyes scanning the horizon. "We've been tracked." From the shadows of a nearby structure, several Qatari soldiers emerged, their sleek, dark armor reflecting the dim moonlight. They were heavily armed, and their presence was menacing. But Javi's focus wasn't on them. No, it was on the massive, looming fortress in the distance, where the heart of the Empire waited. He could feel the weight of the rebels' expectations. "It's up to me. I can't fail them now." The Qatari soldiers raised their weapons. It was only a matter of time before they opened fire, and Javi knew they didn't have time for a fight. He turned to Elira, a spark of determination in his eyes. "I'll create a distraction," Javi said, his voice firm, even though every muscle in his body screamed for him to run. "You take the others and get to the command center. I'll hold them off." Elira's gaze softened for a moment, but then her features hardened. "Be careful. If you die, this rebellion dies with you." Javi didn't respond. There was no time for words. With a swift motion, he dove behind a piece of debris, clutching the experimental weapon he had used earlier. His fingers trembled, but he ignored the fear gnawing at his insides. With a roar, Javi jumped from his cover, firing the weapon. The beam exploded from the barrel, tearing through the air and hitting the first soldier directly. His body crumpled as the energy disintegrated the armor, a violent explosion of light and sound. The rest of the soldiers were momentarily stunned, but then they recovered, returning fire. Javi didn't wait for them to take aim. He sprinted, zigzagging across the open ground, and fired again, sending another soldier to the ground. The force of the blast knocked the enemy back, and Javi used the opportunity to leap toward the nearby cliffs, putting distance between him and the remaining soldiers. Elira's voice crackled over the comms. "We're in position. Now." Javi's heart pounded in his chest as he took cover in a shallow crater. The remaining Qatari soldiers were closing in, but Javi knew he had done his part. The rebels were inside the command center. The tides of war were shifting. The weapon in his hands began to hum again, its power surging. Javi's breath hitched. It was time. The enemy's soldiers were almost upon him. Just as they closed in, Javi triggered the device, sending a powerful shockwave through the ground. The explosion that followed was cataclysmic. The earth trembled beneath him, and the shockwave knocked him off his feet, sending him tumbling through the air. The world spun wildly as debris and fire filled the air, engulfing the Qatari forces in a brutal, all-consuming wave. When the dust settled, Javi was on his knees, his body battered and bruised, but still alive. He glanced up toward the fortress. The energy shield protecting it flickered, weak, almost gone. It wouldn't be long now before the rebels inside overwhelmed the remaining defenders. The heart of the Empire was within their grasp. But then something caught his eye. From the ruins, a figure emerged, one Javi had hoped to never see again. The red-skinned leader, her body charred and broken, but still very much alive, glared at him with a mix of hatred and desperation. She raised her weapon, aiming it directly at Javi. For a split second, everything felt like it was slowing down. He didn't have time to think, only to act. The weapon in his hands was almost out of power, but he had one shot left. He aimed it at her with trembling hands, and without hesitation, fired. The blast hit her square in the chest. The red-skinned leader fell, crumpling to the ground in a heap, her weapon slipping from her fingers. Javi exhaled sharply, feeling the weight of what he had just done. He had killed her, but he didn't feel satisfaction. He didn't feel relief. It was just a step toward freedom. As the fortress in the distance began to crumble, the sound of victory rang out among the rebels. Their rebellion had succeeded. The Qatar Empire was no more. Javi staggered to his feet, blood dripping from his wounds, but he was alive. And for the first time in what felt like an eternity, he felt the weight of his past lift. The future was uncertain, but one thing was for sure. He had given everything for this moment. And in the end, it had been enough.